Sylvia Mercer, 31 years old, and I never imagined that the night I would finally reclaim my life would start with my mother passing me the breadbasket and telling me I looked tired. That was her tell. She always led with concern when she was about to move in for something. I'd driven 40 minutes to get to my parents' house that evening, through the kind of sticky August heat that makes the whole world feel slightly wrong. My aunt and uncle were visiting from out of town, which was supposedly the reason for the dinner. My younger brother was there too, sitting across from me, already on his second beer before we'd even sat down. My grandmother was at the head of the table, the way she always is, wearing her good cardigan, the navy one she saves for occasions she considers important. Looking back, I should have understood that the good cardigan meant something. I had been suspicious for a few weeks by then, small things mostly. A phone call between my mother and my aunt that went quiet the moment I walked into the room. My grandmother asking me, twice in 1 month, whether I had a good accountant. My mother forwarding me an article about burnout with a note that said, "You don't have to keep pushing yourself so hard, sweetheart." She never sent me articles. Not once in 31 years had my mother sent me a link to anything. I work in forensic accounting. I spend my days finding the things people try to hide inside spreadsheets and balance sheets. I am not, by nature or by training, someone who misses patterns. So when I arrived at that dinner, I had already been watching. I just didn't have the full picture yet. My mother set a pot roast in the center of the table and everyone made the right noises about how good it smelled, and for about 15 minutes it felt like a normal family dinner. My uncle told a story about a fishing trip that went long. My brother asked our grandmother about her neighbor's dog. I ate and listened and kept my hands relaxed in my lap, because one of the things I've learned from my work is that the moment you let people see that you're watching, they stop giving you information. Then my mother turned to me and asked how things were going at the firm. "Fine," I said. "Busy." "You always say that." She smiled, but it didn't reach all the way. "I just wonder sometimes if you're taking on too much." "I'm managing." "You've always been so determined," my aunt said, and I noticed she and my mother exchanged something very small, very quick across the table. "Even as a little girl, stubborn." She laughed when she said it like it was a compliment. My brother was looking at his plate. My grandmother reached over and patted my hand. "We just love you, Sylvia. We want what's best for you." I smiled. I said thank you. I asked my uncle about his fishing trip. Inside, something had gone very still. Let me back up 2 months. My grandmother turned 82 in June, and at her birthday dinner she announced, without any particular drama, that she had been thinking about her estate. This was not unusual. She'd been thinking about her estate for as long as I could remember. What she said next, though, was new. She said she wanted to make sure that everything was handled cleanly, that she didn't want any confusion after she was gone, and that she had decided to put someone in charge of managing the financial decisions going forward. Not a lawyer. Family. She looked at me when she said it. I was the logical choice, I suppose. I'm a forensic accountant. I understand money the way a surgeon understands the body. My grandmother knew this. She'd always said she trusted me more than any banker or attorney because I actually knew what questions to ask. My mother smiled at me from across the table. It was the same smile from the breadbasket, the one that doesn't reach her eyes. 3 days after that birthday dinner, my mother called me to talk about what Grandma had said. She was warm, enthusiastic, supportive. She thought it was a wonderful idea. She said Grandma had been thinking about consolidating some of her accounts, maybe restructuring a few things, and that it would be helpful to have all of that go through one person. "It would just be so much cleaner," she said. I agreed that it would. A week later, my aunt called, then my uncle. Each of them had a slightly different version of the same conversation. How wonderful that Grandma wanted to put this in my hands. How much they trusted me. How much Grandma trusted me. How important it was to have someone in the family who understood these things. 3 phone calls. Same message. That doesn't happen by accident. I started paying attention to different things after that. I asked my grandmother casually during one of our regular Sunday calls whether she'd spoken with anyone about her estate plans recently. She said yes, she'd had a long talk with my mother, and that my mother had a few ideas about simplifying things. I asked her what kinds of ideas. She was vague. She said something about consolidating, about making things easier to manage. I asked her if she'd talked to her attorney. There was a pause. She said she didn't think that was necessary since she had me. I sat with that for a week. Then I called my grandmother's attorney myself, not to interfere, just to understand where things stood. He was careful on the phone, appropriately cautious, but he did confirm that no changes had been filed in the past year and that the will, as it stood, divided my grandmother's estate equally among her 3 children, my mother, my aunt, and my uncle, with a separate smaller bequest designated for me and my brother. That was not what my mother had been describing when she talked about simplifying. I started keeping notes, dates, conversations, exact wording, as close as I could remember it. I took screenshots of text messages. I am a forensic accountant. Documentation is how I think. Then, about 3 weeks before the August dinner, something happened that changed everything. My brother called me, which he almost never does. We get along fine, but we're not close. He's 4 years younger, lives 40 minutes in the other direction, and we mostly see each other at family occasions. He sounded uncomfortable on the phone, like he was choosing his words carefully. He said he'd been at the house for dinner the week before and he'd overheard something he thought I should know. He said he hadn't meant to listen, he'd just gone back inside for his jacket and the kitchen door was open and he heard Mom and Aunt Diane talking. They were talking about a doctor. Not a regular doctor, a psychiatrist. He said they were talking about how I had been under so much pressure at work, how they were worried about my state of mind, how it might be worth having a professional assessment, just to make sure I was okay, that they were doing it out of love. That if there were any concerns documented, it would actually be better for everyone, better for Grandma's situation, easier to manage things cleanly. My brother said he didn't fully understand what he was hearing, but something about it felt wrong. That's why he called me. I thanked him. I kept my voice completely level. I told him I was glad he told me and that I'd take care of it. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. They were building a case, not for my benefit, for theirs. A documented mental health concern, even a minor one, would give them grounds to challenge my grandmother's choice to put me in charge of her finances. It would give my mother a reason to step in instead. And if my mother stepped in, if she became the one managing those accounts, the restructuring she'd been talking about would be a lot easier to accomplish without anyone asking inconvenient questions. My grandmother trusted me, but she also trusted my mother, and my mother was a lot better at being trusted than she was at being trustworthy. I made an appointment with a therapist the next day, a licensed one, someone with a long professional record, someone whose documentation would be unimpeachable. I explained that I was dealing with some family stress and that I wanted to be proactive about my mental health. All of that was true. I went to 3 sessions over the following 2 weeks. Then I called the psychiatrist my mother had apparently been in contact with. It wasn't hard to find out who it was. My aunt had mentioned a name in a text message to my mother that my mother had accidentally forwarded to me along with a note about scheduling. I don't think she realized I was in that thread. I didn't call pretending to be anyone else. I simply called the office and said I understood they had been asked to conduct a wellness evaluation for a family member, and I wanted to inquire about the process. The receptionist, who clearly didn't know the full situation, confirmed that a consultation had been scheduled at a family member's request. A consultation, for me, without my knowledge, without my consent. I had everything I needed. I sat at that dinner table and I passed the rolls and I asked my uncle about fishing and I watched my mother watch me. She thought she was being subtle. She was not being subtle. The dinner went on for 2 hours. My aunt kept steering conversation toward my work, how demanding it must be, how much I traveled, how stressful it all sounded. My grandmother kept looking at me with that particular kind of soft concern that I recognized now as something she'd been coached into. My mother offered me wine twice and chamomile tea once, which she has never done in her life. My brother caught my eye from across the table at one point, just for a second. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. Dessert was strawberry cake, my grandmother's favorite. Everyone had a slice and the conversation got looser, easier, and I thought, now. I want to say something, I said. The table got quiet. My mother looked up. I've really appreciated how much everyone has been thinking about me lately, I said. The phone calls, the check-ins, it means a lot. I paused. I know how much work goes into that kind of coordinated effort. My aunt set down her fork. I've also been doing some thinking, I said, about Grandma's estate and about some of the conversations that have been happening around it. I looked at my grandmother. I want you to know that your attorney and I have spoken. Your current will is exactly as you drew it up. Nothing has been changed. Nothing is going to be changed without your direct instruction in writing with your attorney present. My grandmother blinked. Of course, she said slowly. That's how it should be. I also want to be transparent, I said, because I think transparency is important in situations like this. I was using my work voice. Calm, precise, unhurried. I know about the psychiatric consultation. The table went completely silent. I know the appointment was made without my knowledge and without my consent. I know the intended purpose was to create documentation that could be used to question my fitness to manage Grandma's financial decisions. I set my napkin on the table. I understand that this was framed internally as concern for my well-being. My mother opened her mouth. I kept going. I've been seeing a licensed therapist for the past 3 weeks. I have session records. I have documentation of my mental and emotional health from a credentialed professional who has actually met me. I paused. The psychiatrist your office contacted has not. My aunt's face had gone the color of old paper. Scheduling a mental health evaluation for an adult without their knowledge or consent is not a gray area, I said. Depending on the intent and the jurisdiction, it can constitute tortious interference. Using fabricated or improperly obtained documentation in a probate or guardianship proceeding would be fraud. My mother said my name. Her voice had something in it I didn't recognize at first. And then I did. It was fear. I'm not saying any of this to threaten anyone, I said. I'm saying it so that everyone at this table understands that I know. I've known for a while. And I have kept very thorough records. My grandmother was looking at my mother. It was the longest I had ever seen her look at her without saying anything. My uncle cleared his throat. Sylvia, I think there's been some misunderstanding. There hasn't, I said. Not unkindly. Just clearly. There's been a plan. And the plan hasn't worked. The strawberry cake sat in the middle of the table and nobody touched it. What happened next is hard to describe cleanly because it wasn't clean. My mother started crying. Real tears, I think, though I wasn't sure then, and I'm still not sure now. She said she'd been so worried about me. She said she'd only wanted to help. She said things had gotten out of hand, that it was never supposed to go this far. My aunt stayed quiet, which told me more than anything she could have said. My grandmother asked my mother, very quietly, whether she had arranged for someone to evaluate me without telling me. My mother said it hadn't been like that, it was just a conversation. It was just to get some information. My grandmother asked again, the same question, in the same quiet voice. My mother didn't answer. My brother was looking at the table. His jaw was tight. He'd known something was wrong back when he called me and he'd been right. And I think sitting in that room watching it unfold was harder for him than it was for me. I'd had weeks to process it. He was doing it in real time. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I had made a decision weeks earlier about what I wanted from this moment, and it wasn't a scene. Scenes give people things to talk about afterward. Ways to reframe the story, ways to make themselves the victim. I didn't want to give anyone that. What I wanted was for everyone in that room to understand exactly what they had done and to know that I knew. I stood up. I thanked my grandmother for dinner. I said I loved her and I would call her Sunday the way I always did. She held my hand for a moment longer than usual and said she was sorry. Not for the family, generally. She said I am sorry. First person, singular. And something about the way she said it made me think she understood more than she'd let on and that she was ashamed. I said goodbye to my brother. He walked me to my car. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. There are things I've thought about a lot since that night. I've thought about whether to involve an attorney. I consulted with one the following week. Just a conversation. an information gathering meeting. The kind of thing I do before making any decision. She told me that what had been done wasn't nothing, that there might be grounds for action, that it would depend on what could be proven and what I wanted as an outcome. I thought about that question for a long time. What did I want as an outcome? I didn't want money. My grandmother's estate was my grandmother's to distribute however she chose, and it always had been. I didn't want a legal battle that would spend years of my life and a significant portion of my grandmother's remaining time on Earth in courtrooms and depositions. What I wanted was for it to stop, and for everyone involved to know that if it didn't stop, I had every tool I needed to make the next conversation happen somewhere other than a dinner table. I called my mother 2 weeks later. She answered on the first ring, which she never does. I told her I wasn't calling to argue. I told her I was calling because she was my mother and because I had decided that that still meant something to me and that I wanted to be clear about what our relationship looked like going forward. I told her that I would not be discussing my grandmother's finances with her, not now, not in the future, that if she had concerns about the estate she could raise them with Grandma's attorney directly and openly, not through maneuvering. I told her that if anything like what had happened before happened again, I would act on it, without hesitation and without another dinner table conversation first. She said she understood. She didn't apologize, not really. She talked around the apology the way she always talks around things she doesn't want to say directly. But she said she understood. My grandmother and I still talk every Sunday. She's asked me a few times, carefully, how I'm doing, how things are between me and my mother. I tell her the truth, which is that things are not the way they used to be, and that I think they might not be again, and that I'm making my peace with that. My grandmother said once, near the end of one of our Sunday calls, that she was sorry I had to be so strong. She said it like it was a hard thing, being strong, and I understood what she meant. She wasn't saying I shouldn't be. She was saying it cost something, and she knew it. I said, I learned from watching you. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, then I hope you also learned when to rest. I'm still working on that part, but I'm working on it. The one thing I know for certain is this. I didn't leave that table because I stopped loving my family. I left because I finally understood that love is not the same thing as trust, and that I had been confusing the two for a very long time. The people at that table love me probably in their own distorted and self-interested way, but not one of them, in the moment it counted, chose me over what they stood to gain. Except my brother, he called me when he didn't have to. He sat across from me at that table and he didn't pretend he didn't know. I will not forget that. You find out who people are when something is at stake. I know that now. In a way, I can't unknow. And strange as it sounds, I'm grateful for it. I would rather know the truth about the people around me, however hard it is to hold, than live comfortably inside a story that was never real. Some things, once you see them clearly, you can't afford to look away from again. I used to think that being good to people was enough to protect you from them, that if you showed up, if you were reliable, if you kept your word, people would extend you the same decency in return. Sylvia believed that too, I think, for a long time. She loved her family. She showed up for Sunday calls and birthday dinners and passed the bread without suspicion, because that's what you do when you trust the people at the table with you. But actions have weight, and eventually weight lands somewhere. What her mother and aunt set in motion didn't fail because they got unlucky. It failed because it was built on a lie, and lies require constant maintenance, more coordination, more cover, more people keeping their stories straight. Every deceptive plan carries the seed of its own unraveling inside it. The phone call that gets forwarded by mistake, the brother who goes back inside for his jacket at the wrong moment, the receptionist who doesn't know she's not supposed to confirm anything. You can't build something solid out of dishonesty. The structure always finds its own cracks. And then there's what Sylvia brought to that table. Not just courage. That word gets used too loosely. What she brought was the willingness to see clearly even when it hurt, to follow the evidence wherever it led, even when that evidence pointed at her own mother. That's a harder thing than most people realize. It's one thing to be skeptical of strangers, it's another thing entirely to look at someone who held your hand when you were small and ask yourself, what is she actually doing here? That kind of clear-eyed thinking, the kind that doesn't flinch from the uncomfortable answer, is something most of us spend our whole lives avoiding. She didn't avoid it. She documented, she called the attorney, she made the therapy appointments, she kept the text messages. She built her case the same way she builds cases at work, methodically, without drama, without tipping her hand. That's not just intelligence. That's discipline. That's the difference between knowing something is wrong and actually being able to prove it. And then she sat at that table and she spoke, calmly, precisely, without cruelty, but without softening it either. She didn't perform anger she didn't feel. She didn't give them a scene they could use to rewrite the story afterward. She just said, I know. I have documentation, and I want everyone in this room to understand that clearly. That takes something most people struggle to find, especially when the people who hurt you are people you still love. It takes the ability to hold two things at once: the grief of what the relationship turned out to be, and the resolve to protect yourself anyway. To say, I am not going to let love be the thing that makes me vulnerable to you. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of this, is that integrity isn't just about how you treat others. It's about how honestly you're willing to see them. Her mother lacked that. Her aunt lacked it. They dressed their self-interest up in a language of concern so thoroughly that I wonder sometimes if they even knew the difference anymore. Sylvia did. That's why she's the one who walked out of that dinner with her head clear. She told her grandmother she learned strength from watching her. I think that's true. But I also think she learned something her grandmother maybe couldn't teach her directly. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. That refusal is hard-won, and it's worth everything.